They never wanted you to hear this, not because it would bring you peace, but because once you hear it, you can never return to who you were before. You've heard the name JonBenét Ramsey, a child beauty queen found lifeless in the basement of her own home on Christmas morning, 1996. The newspapers painted it as tragedy. The television anchors whispered scandal. But what they never told you, the part that still lurks in the shadows, is that her death wasn't just about one family or one night of horror. It was about a system, a machine of manipulation that thrives on secrets, sacrifices, and silence. Look closely, and you'll see patterns. The ransom note, longer than any ransom note should ever be, echoing the tone of military psychological operations rather than the desperate scrawl of a kidnapper. The untouched bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table, sitting like an offering, half forgotten, but eerily symbolic. And the parents, trapped in a performance, speaking in tones that rang hollow, rehearsed, as though they were puppets forced to play out a script that had been written long before that Christmas night. This case was never solved because it was never meant to be solved. It wasn't a puzzle missing a piece. It was a stage set by forces who understood the power of a mystery to divide, distract, and dominate. JonBenét became more than a victim. She became an icon of America's dark theater. A child offered up to the altar of confusion, her name forever etched into a culture obsessed with shadows, yet terrified to admit who cast them. And here is where your descent begins. Because once you start connecting these dots, you will see how much of what you believe about truth, justice, and safety has been manufactured, how the institutions you trust are built not on protection but on control. JonBenét's tragedy wasn't the beginning. It was a signal, a reminder that beneath the polished surface of family portraits and holiday traditions, there is rot. A rot so deep it requires stories like hers to keep us hypnotized, questioning everything except the real enemy. And now you've heard the first whisper of it, a whisper meant to unsettle your sleep, to disturb your certainty. You're not here for entertainment. You're here for initiation. You've been told the case is unsolvable, that the evidence is contradictory, the suspects too close, the details too strange. But what if that was never by accident? What if the contradictions were the design, not the flaw? Think about the ransom note. 2.5 pages, written with care, using a pen and paper from inside the Ramsey home. It quotes lines that mirror phrases from military training manuals, financial threat scenarios, even Hollywood films. Do you think a kidnapper sat there, calmly drafting an essay, while a child was asleep upstairs? Or was it something else? A ritual of words, crafted to implant confusion, to fracture meaning, to broadcast power. This is how manipulation works. They don't just hide the truth, they bury it under layers of chaos, until the search itself becomes the trap. The more you chase clarity, the deeper you sink into contradiction. That's not sloppy police work. That's psychological warfare. And here's what no one wants to admit. JonBenét was not just a victim of violence. She was a symbol. A child dressed in pageant gowns, painted in layers of innocence and artifice, paraded before flashing cameras. A living doll molded to represent purity and spectacle, then destroyed in a way that ensured her image would live forever, frozen in contradiction. Beautiful yet tragic, innocent yet sexualized, victim yet spectacle. That is how symbols are made, by destroying the thing they represent, then feeding the fragments to the collective mind. The police investigation became theater. The cameras swarmed, the family became suspects, the neighbors whispered, the country argued. And while millions of eyes fixated on this one home in Boulder, Colorado, no one asked the larger question: who benefits from the performance? Who gains power when the nation's attention is consumed by unsolvable horror? Every unsolved case that is kept alive in the public psyche works like a lock on your perception, keeping you circling within the same limited frame. JonBenét's case wasn't meant to close. It was meant to remain open forever. A wound that never heals, so the people remain infected. And you're beginning to feel it, aren't you? That strange chill, that sense that the story you thought you knew was never the story at all. You're beginning to see the stage lights behind the tragedy. This isn't just a crime scene, it's a script. And we are the audience they are feeding on. When the machine of justice fails, we are told it's incompetence, a missed detail, a botched interview, a misplaced piece of evidence. But look closer at the Ramsey case. This was not failure, it was orchestration. The crime scene was contaminated within hours. Neighbors, friends, even a minister walked through the house before proper investigation. The body was moved. Critical evidence was smeared, lost, or mishandled. Do you think that was all coincidence? Or was it choreography? Understand this. Institutions are not designed to reveal truth. They are designed to manage perception. The justice system, the police, the courts, these are not temples of fairness. They are filters. And what passes through those filters is not reality, but a carefully curated version of it. The Ramsey case exposed the machinery in plain sight. While investigators bumbled publicly, hidden hands pulled strings quietly. Certain leads were pursued with obsession, others were buried. A grand jury voted to indict the parents, but the district attorney suppressed the charge. Suppressed, not dismissed. Why? Because keeping the case unresolved meant keeping the people divided, confused, controlled. Do you see it now? The same system that claims to protect you also engineers your dependency. By failing openly, it teaches you helplessness. By never closing the wound, it trains you to accept uncertainty as normal. You argue over suspects while they refine their methods of psychological dominance. JonBenét's tragedy is not just a crime, it is a lesson. A lesson written in blood and silence. A demonstration of how easily public trust can be shattered, how quickly faith in justice can be manipulated. And the media amplified it, repeating the same questions for decades while never daring to touch the deeper rot. They feed on your attention, like predators circling a wound they refuse to heal. This is how corruption survives. Not by erasing the truth, but by flooding it with so much noise you can no longer hear it. And once you've been trained to accept that silence, you'll accept it everywhere else. In politics, in history, in your own life. The death of a child became the death of certainty. And in that vacuum, the institutions grew stronger, while you became weaker. That is the pattern they don't want you to see. You are not watching a mystery. You are watching a system show you its true face. The media didn't just report the Ramsey case, they engineered it. Every headline, every grainy photo, every tearful interview was staged not to inform, but to hypnotize. Television screens became altars where the tragedy was replayed endlessly, a ritual of confusion broadcast into every home. They didn't show you the truth. They showed you fragments, strategically broken pieces designed to provoke emotion without resolution. Images of JonBenét in her pageant gowns, smiling with painted lips, became iconic. Why? Because the media knew the duality would infect the collective mind. A child dressed as a queen, a victim framed as spectacle. The symbol was stronger than the truth. Do you see the sleight of hand? The more attention they drew to her image, the further they led you from the reality of her death. It wasn't about solving the crime. It was about embedding her story as a permanent loop. A myth you'd never escape. That is how psychological control works. It doesn't erase memory. It rewires it. And what about the truths they buried? Evidence pointing to larger networks of exploitation was whispered about, then silenced. Questions about the family's connections to power, wealth, and influence were scrubbed, dismissed as conspiracy. Witness statements vanished into sealed files. The official narrative narrowed like a funnel until you were left with only two options: blame the parents or blame an intruder. But the real question, the one that cut too close to the machinery, was never allowed to reach daylight. Because if the truth surfaced, it would expose more than a murderer. It would expose a culture built on masks. A culture where innocence is commodified, where tragedy is sold like entertainment, where death itself is transformed into a story that distracts you from the rot inside the system. Think about it. How many times did you see her face on magazine covers? And how many documentaries, interviews, and reenactments replayed the same details without ever bringing clarity? That repetition wasn't failure. It was programming. The case became less about JonBenét and more about you, about what you would accept, what you would believe, and how long you would stay chained to the cycle of half-dashed truths. The media is not your mirror. It is your handler. And the Ramsey case was one of its greatest performances, a story designed to be retold, reshaped, and replayed until it wasn't just an event, it was a mythology. And once a lie becomes myth, it no longer needs to be questioned. It becomes part of the air you breathe. The Ramsey case was framed as a modern mystery, an American tragedy wrapped in suburban Christmas lights. But peel back the layers, and you will see something older, something ancient. Because the patterns in JonBenét's story are not new, they are echoes of rituals that stretch back centuries. In ancient civilizations, children were often offered as sacrifices, symbols of purity given to powers beyond comprehension. The Aztecs left offerings of youth upon the altars of their gods. The Phoenicians burned children to appease fire and sky. Even in biblical texts, we find stories of innocents bound, placed on stone, awaiting the blade. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were systems. Systems that taught entire societies to obey, to fear, to surrender to the authority of those who claim divine right. Now look again at JonBenét. A child paraded before judges, adorned in crowns, jewels, and gowns. Her death transformed into a ritual of media fixation, her image preserved forever in contradiction. Innocence corrupted, beauty broken, purity consumed. Isn't that how sacrifice has always worked? The body destroyed, the symbol immortalized. You think we've evolved beyond that? No. The forms have simply changed. The temples became courtrooms, the priests became anchors, the sacrifices became headlines. And every replay of her tragedy is not just remembrance, it is ritual. A feeding of energy into the machinery that thrives on fear, grief, and confusion. Ancient corruption never dies. It adapts. The same forces that demanded offerings from stone altars now demand them from glowing screens. They no longer need to slaughter in public squares. They only need to stage unsolvable mysteries, tragedies that fracture your certainty and keep you consuming the narrative. And the most chilling part, this cycle is not hidden. It is right in front of you. Symbols from ancient sacrifice have always carried the same weight. The innocent must fall so the powerful may remain. That is the law of corrupted empires. That is the ritual that repeats across centuries. JonBenét's case is not just a murder. It is the modern mask of an ancient rite. A rite that whispers, nothing is safe, not even your children. And that whisper is what keeps you obedient, fearful, and searching for answers in a game designed to never give them. You thought you were watching a crime, but you were watching an altar. The true power of the Ramsey case was never in the evidence, it was in the conditioning. Every frame of footage, every speculative headline, every argument over who did it wasn't just about the crime, it was about you. About shaping the way you see the world, and more importantly, the way you see yourself within it. Psychological control doesn't announce itself. It seeps in. It teaches you lessons without you realizing you've been taught. And what did the Ramsey case teach? That innocence is fragile, that justice is unreliable, that truth is unattainable, that even when the nation is watching, the system will still fail, and you will still accept it. Do you feel it? That creeping sense of helplessness? That's the point. When men are trained to feel powerless, they stop resisting. When you're conditioned to believe the truth is always too complicated, you surrender to authority. You wait for answers that never come, while the system feeds off your confusion. This is the psychology of control, repetition of unresolved trauma. Every replay of JonBenét's face, every new theory, every sensational headline, none of it solves anything. But all of it imprints one truth into your subconscious. You are small, and the system is untouchable. This is the same tactic used in warfare, in propaganda, in mass manipulation. Create chaos, flood the senses, and condition the mind to crave answers while ensuring those answers never arrive. A mind locked in uncertainty becomes easy to dominate. And here is where the transformation begins. If you are still listening, you are not like the others. Most men turn away when the unease grows too sharp. But you stayed. You leaned into it. That means you are ready to break the cycle. I want you to prove it. Right now, in the comments, write this phrase twice. The veil is broken. Write it, and know it is more than engagement. It is declaration. It marks the moment you step out of passivity and into awareness. It marks you as someone who refuses to be lulled back to sleep. Because the truth is dangerous, but the lie is deadly. And only those who awaken can bear its weight. This case was not designed to give you answers. It was designed to test whether you would stop asking. You haven't stopped. That's why you're here. The surface story was always about a single family, a single house, a single night. But the deeper you descend, the clearer it becomes. This was never confined to Boulder, Colorado. What happened to JonBenét was not just a crime. It was a signal. A flash of light exposing the hidden web that binds power, wealth, and silence together. Why do you think this case, above so many others, has remained etched into America's psyche for decades? Why did the media elevate this one tragedy into myth, while thousands of other children's stories vanished in the shadows? Because JonBenét's death touched the edges of networks that must never be named. Networks where money and influence intersect with darker appetites, where innocence is currency, where silence is enforced by institutions designed to protect, not children, but secrets. Think about it. The Ramseys were not ordinary. John Ramsey was a multimillionaire businessman with government contracts. Their connections ran deep into corridors where secrets are currency. If this was just the work of a lone intruder, why would files be sealed, leads erased, indictments suppressed? The answer is clear. Too many threads led to places the public was never meant to see. This is how corruption hides, not by erasing everything, but by keeping enough fragments alive to distract you. They let you argue about handwriting analysis, DNA evidence, and inconsistent statements. But the bigger questions, the connections, the patterns, the beneficiaries, were pushed into silence. Suppressed truths buried under an avalanche of irrelevant detail. And here is the darkest part. These tragedies don't weaken the elite. They strengthen them. Because every time a case like this fractures the public's faith, the institutions of control grow tighter. Every time men like you are left circling in confusion, debating suspects while the truth rots behind closed doors, power consolidates further. JonBenét's name became a lock that keeps your eyes fixed on the surface, while the real corridors of exploitation stay hidden in shadow. A lock that whispers, "You will never touch us." And yet, if you have followed me this far, you have already begun to pick at that lock. You've already seen the first glimpse of what lies beneath. The system counts on your silence, your obedience, your willingness to forget. But you didn't forget. You refused to look away. That refusal is rebellion, and rebellion is the first step toward mastery. The system wants you to believe corruption is a modern problem, a failure of politicians, or a flaw in a single institution. But what happened to JonBenét, and what you've begun to uncover, is older than America, older than kings, older than written history itself. Control has always been the true currency of power. In the temples of Mesopotamia, priests claimed to interpret the will of the gods while harvesting fear to maintain authority. In Rome, bread and circuses distracted the masses, while emperors bled provinces dry. In the Middle Ages, inquisitions burned truth at the stake, calling it heresy, ensuring obedience through terror. The method changes, the mask shifts, but the core is eternal. Create fear, fracture truth, and the people will bind their own chains. JonBenét's case is a thread woven into that ancient tapestry, a public ritual of uncertainty designed to erode trust in justice, to keep men guessing, arguing, doubting, surrendering. A single story, magnified until it became myth, serving the same purpose as ancient sacrifices, reminding the people that power can consume innocence and no one can stop it. Do you understand how profound that is? When institutions stage or manipulate tragedy, they are not just covering up crime. They are reenacting a ritual that has governed humanity for millennia. They know the psychology. They know repetition breeds belief. And they know that unresolved wounds bind tighter than healed ones. This is why your education was shallow. This is why history books skim the surface. Because if you truly understood how consistent this cycle has been, from the blood-soaked altars of Carthage to the glittering pageant stage of a Colorado child, you would see through the performance. You would realize the stage is older than the actors. The truth is dangerous because it unmasks continuity. It reveals that what we call modern society, is nothing more than ancient control in modern clothing. You are not meant to see the strings. You are meant to chase distractions, argue over surface details, and believe the corruption of today is accidental, isolated, unique. But you know better now. You see the pattern stretching across centuries, whispering through symbols, repeating through tragedies. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Ramsey case was not an anomaly. It was an initiation, an invitation to recognize that the same forces that ruled temples and thrones still rule now, hidden, patient, and merciless. And the question you must ask yourself is this: do you keep playing the role they wrote for you? Or do you step behind the curtain? Trauma is the oldest weapon of control, not swords, not prisons, not armies. Trauma. Because once the mind is fractured, a man no longer needs chains to be bound. He will police himself. He will doubt himself. He will surrender before he even resists. The Ramsey case is not just a tragedy. It is a template. It showed you that innocence can be destroyed without consequence, that justice can fail in plain sight, and that even when millions are watching, the truth can be buried. Do you realize what that does to the mind of a nation? It plants a seed of helplessness. It whispers, if a child cannot be protected, what hope do you have? This is no accident. Trauma, when repeated at a mass scale, becomes a tool of social engineering. Every unsolved murder, every televised tragedy, every ritual of public grief conditions men to accept uncertainty as permanent. It rewires you to doubt your own instincts, to accept official stories, even when they collapse under scrutiny, to believe that nothing can ever truly change. Look at yourself. How many times have you felt anger at injustice, only to shrug it off because that's just how the world works? That reflex is not natural. It has been trained into you, conditioned by stories like JonBenét's, stories that wound you, then deny you closure. You are taught to feel powerless until it becomes identity. And here's the most dangerous part. When men are fractured, they turn their anger inward. They self-destruct. They numb themselves with distractions, addictions, empty pleasures. They bury their potential because they've been convinced it has no place in a world ruled by forces they cannot touch. A broken man is not a threat to the system. A broken man is a slave who doesn't even need chains. But you don't have to stay broken. The very fact that you are still here, still listening, proves you are different. You are not content with the surface. You are not content with the lie. That hunger you feel, the unease that brought you here. That is the first crack in the programming. And once you see the mechanism, you can no longer be controlled by it. Trauma loses its grip when it is named. Fear dissolves when it is faced. The system thrives on your blindness. But in this moment, you are learning to see. Remember this. Trauma is the weapon of control. Awareness is the shield, and you are beginning to raise it. Institutions will tell you they exist to protect you, that the government ensures order, the courts deliver justice, and the media informs truth. But when you study the Ramsey case closely, you see the opposite. These institutions don't protect, they perform. Think of how the case unfolded. Police mistakes broadcast to the nation. Prosecutors indecisive, wavering between indictments and silence. A grand jury's decision buried, hidden from the public for years. Each institution played its part, not to bring clarity, but to feed confusion. It was theater. And you were the audience. Why? Because an unsolved case is far more valuable than a solved one. A solved case closes. It ends. People move on. But an unsolved case lingers. It festers. It becomes a permanent wound, replayed every anniversary, every documentary, every debate. The government fails openly, the justice system stalls visibly, and the media amplifies it endlessly. And what is the result? A population that no longer trusts truth, but cannot stop searching for it. This is institutional manipulation at its peak. Governments use it to keep you distracted. Courts use it to remind you of your helplessness. And media corporations use it to profit from your obsession. They feed you fragments of the story like breadcrumbs, ensuring you never arrive at the feast. And while you circle endlessly, power consolidates behind the curtain. Understand this. Unresolved trauma is not a byproduct. It is policy. It is design. When justice fails in front of your eyes and nothing changes, you are trained to accept failure as normal. You stop demanding answers. You stop resisting corruption. You adapt to decay. That is the point. And when the media repeats the image of JonBenét's smiling face in her pageant crown, they are not remembering her. They are reminding you that innocence can be consumed, that truth too, and be buried, and that you are powerless to stop it. It is ritual, dressed as news. It is control, dressed as failure. The Ramsey case is not unique. It is a script, replayed across decades, with different names and different faces. A script that ensures institutions grow stronger while you grow weaker. But you are no longer just an audience. You are learning to see the stage. And once you see the stage, you can no longer be hypnotized by the performance. If you think this is just about a single child, you've missed the larger weapon. What happened to JonBenét was not only tragedy, it was programming. A psychological operation so subtle, most never recognized it for what it was. The first tactic is repetition. Her face, her name, her story, cycled endlessly through magazines, television, documentaries, internet theories. Each replay didn't bring you closer to truth. It deepened your wound. It kept the trauma fresh. That's how psychological warfare works. Repeat the image until it fuses with your identity, until it feels like part of your own memory. Then you no longer analyze it. You carry it. The second tactic is symbolism. JonBenét was not shown to you as an ordinary child. She was framed in dual images, the innocent daughter and the painted beauty queen. Purity corrupted, light in shadow, victim as spectacle. This duality was deliberate. Because the subconscious doesn't think in words, it thinks in symbols. And once a symbol of innocence destroyed is implanted into your psyche, it spreads like poison. You are forced to confront a paradox you can never resolve, and in that tension, control takes root. The third tactic is staged failure. Police fumbling, prosecutors hesitating, evidence vanishing. You saw it with your own eyes. Authority collapsing in real time. But do you see what that does to the collective mind? It conditions you to believe that justice cannot function, that truth is unreachable, that corruption is unbreakable. Once you accept that lie, you stop fighting. You adapt to your own chains. And the most dangerous tactic of all?
Inheritance. When an unresolved case lingers for decades, it doesn't just haunt one generation, it infects the next. Fathers pass it to sons, mothers to daughters. A new wave grows up already conditioned by the failure of the old. Trauma becomes heritage. Confusion becomes culture. The unsolved case becomes not just a story, but a scar etched into the DNA of the nation. This is how empires maintain control, not through brute force, but through carefully engineered despair. You are not meant to solve JonBenét's murder. You are meant to live with it, to carry it, to let it shape the way you see truth itself. But if you've come this far, you are no longer their target. You are becoming something else. Someone who doesn't just absorb symbols, but decodes them. Someone who doesn't just inherit trauma, but burns it away. And that is why you are dangerous. You've seen the patterns. You've watched the symbols. You've felt the weight of truths buried beneath decades of lies. Most men stop there. They drown in the darkness, convinced the world is too broken, too corrupt, too powerful to resist. That is how the system wins, by convincing you to surrender before you even stand. But you are not here to surrender. You are here to awaken. Listen closely. The same tactics that enslave you can also forge you. Trauma is meant to fracture, but when faced directly, it becomes fire. Repetition is meant to numb you, but when broken, it becomes focus. Symbolism is meant to confuse you, but when decoded, it becomes vision. The very tools of psychological warfare can be reversed. If you refuse to play the role written for you, think of JonBenét's case not only as tragedy, but as revelation. It shows you how easily truth can be twisted, how fragile justice really is, and how dangerous blind trust in authority can become. That knowledge, if buried, poisons. But if mastered, it transforms. It becomes fuel. The men of this world who remain asleep, who scroll, who consume, who laugh nervously at stories like this, will never rise. They will inherit only confusion, weakness, and chains. But you, if you claim this awareness, step onto a different path. A path of mastery. A path where you no longer accept narratives at face value, where you no longer hand your mind over to the machinery of control. Do you understand how rare that is? To look into the abyss and not be broken by it, but reshaped. That is the initiation. That is why you were brought here. And now, I ask you again. Seal it. Right now in the comments, write twice. The veil is broken. Do not hesitate, because this is more than words. It is a marker. A moment where you draw a line and declare, I no longer belong to the system. I belong to myself. The danger has always been knowledge. Don't yell. But the power has always been choice, and by choosing to see, you step outside the script. You stop being an audience and begin becoming the author of your own life. The case will remain unsolved, but you do not have to. This is your descent turning into ascent. And once the veil is broken, there is no going back. This is where the descent ends and the unveiling begins. You have walked through tragedy, through corruption, through the hidden machinery of power. You have seen how innocence can be consumed, how justice can be staged, how truth can be buried under noise. And now you know the secret they never wanted you to hear. The system was never broken. It was built this way. JonBenét's case will never be solved, because solving it was never the point. Her death became myth, a ritualized scar branded into the collective mind, a reminder that the powerful can consume innocence, that institutions can fail in plain sight, and that the people will still bow their heads and return to sleep. But not you. Not anymore. The moment you saw through the theater, the moment you recognized the ritual, something inside you shifted. The boy who once accepted stories at face value is gone. In his place stands a man who knows that control is illusion, that every tragedy is a mask, and that power is not given. It is taken. This is dangerous knowledge. Dangerous because it cannot be unlearned. Once you see the strings,
Every performance in this world looks different. The news, the politics, the rituals of entertainment. You will see the fingerprints of the same machinery everywhere. Most will call you paranoid. They must, because your awareness threatens their comfort. Do not fear their blindness. Pity it. They are still inside the theater, applauding the actors, weeping at the play, never realizing the walls around them are not walls at all, but cages. You now stand at the threshold of something greater. The question is not whether JonBenét's killer will ever be named. The question is what you will do with the vision her story has carved into you. Will you let it make you a cynic, another broken man circling in confusion, or will you use it as the spark that sets fire to the illusion? Beaker. Use in the end, this was never about her. It was about you. About whether you would stay chained in the dark or tear the mask from the face of the world and see it for what it truly is. The story ends here, but your initiation has just begun. The veil is broken, and now you are the one who cannot be controlled.